The crowd's laughter sliced through the air like a blade as Marina Cross stood alone on the polished deck, her simple cotton dress a stark rebellion against the ocean of diamonds and silk. Phones flashed, cruel whispers buzzed like locusts, and somewhere across the world, her mother watched in silent agony. But in the next heartbeat, the name that would shatter their arrogance and rewrite the fate of Avalon Cove would fall from the stage: Dr. Marina Cross. Avalon Cove shimmered under the afternoon sun, its white limestone cliffs and jade-green waters an untouched jewel of the Mediterranean. At the heart of the private marina, the Celestia star floated like a titan born of steel and dreams, $215 million of unchallenged elegance. Its titanium hull gleamed under the cloudless sky, teak deck sprawling like a playground for the gods. Only the world's most powerful had been summoned here, their sapphire-inked invitations a whispered passport into a sanctum untouched by common hands. 300 guests milled about, a galaxy of tech tycoons, aristocrats draped in centuries-old jewels, Gulf royals perfumed with the smoky scent of oud, and fashion empire heirs wrapped in layers of bespoke silk. The dress code was ruthless: haute couture gowns with pearl-encrusted trains, Zegna suits with platinum cufflinks, and watches more valuable than penthouses on Fifth Avenue. No unverified soul crossed the marble gangway. Biometric gates and velvet ropes filtered the worthiest from the merely wealthy. Beneath the glint of crystal champagne flutes and the flash of Cartier bracelets, ambition buzzed like an unseen current. Conversations danced around mergers, diplomatic favors, and fortunes wagered over fine Bordeaux. Here, names were not spoken, they were weighed. Power hummed in the salt air, intoxicating and unrelenting. It was into this crucible of opulence that Marina Cross stepped, her sandals making a muted sound against the polished dock. Her dress, simple and handcrafted by a coastal artisan from the Amalfi Coast, billowed around her like sea foam caught on a breeze. Her chestnut hair, tied loosely with a strip of woven hemp, brushed her sun-kissed shoulders. No diamonds crowned her collarbone, no gold encircled her wrists. At 31, Marina carried herself with the easy grace of someone who had lived beyond the glittering walls of privilege, her eyes sharp as coral, her skin bronzed from years charting the shifting heartbeats of the oceans. She bore no legacy on her sleeve, only the quiet dignity of a life lived in pursuit of truth beneath the tides. The reaction was instantaneous. Head swiveled. A ripple of confusion sliced through the assembled throng like a blade through silk. Laughter, brittle and incredulous, bubbled up in glittering clusters. A woman in a $75,000 Dior gown leaned toward her companion, her voice slicing the humid air. "Did the dock crew lose one of their own?" she sneered, clutching her flute of Dom Perignon. Phones emerged like daggers unsheathed, camera flashes subtle, captions brutal. Hashtag cross-mistake. Hashtag yacht outcast. Hashtag Celestia shame. The hashtags ignited in private group chats, traveling faster than the Mistral winds. A Saudi prince's aide discreetly filmed her from behind a velvet column, his watch worth more than the village where Marina's sandals were crafted. Among the sneering crowd, Brielle Hastings, wrapped in a body-hugging Versace masterpiece, her diamonds flashing like a constellation around her neck, let out a laugh loud enough to ripple the surface of her flute. She tilted her head toward a circle of heirs, her voice honeyed poison. "Looks like the Marina charity event got the dates mixed up," she drawled, her followers chuckling behind manicured hands. The scorn was contagious. A logistics mogul from Dubai whispered behind a bejeweled cuff, "Maybe she's here to refill the ice buckets." The Comet drew a wave of chuckles from the tech elite lounging along the starboard side, their silk ties trembling with suppressed laughter. The staff, trained to be invisible yet omnipresent, were not immune to the herd's disdain. A steward in a sharply creased uniform paused near Marina, his smile too sharp. "Miss, the crew's access is backed by the technician's dock," he said, his voice pitched to carry. His comment drew a ripple of malicious titters from a knot of guests nearby. Marina met his gaze coolly, her lips pressed into a calm line, and continued walking toward the main deck without a word. Every step felt like wading through a storm of invisible barbs. Guests parted like a disdainful tide, whispering behind manicured nails, their jeweled phones capturing every angle of her mistake. She caught fragments of their sneers. The public beach must be missing a patron. Maybe she's a last-minute server. Perhaps a sea gypsy got lost. Across the globe, in a small coastal village in Maine, Marina's mother watched the private live stream with trembling hands. She clutched a weathered seashell pendant at her throat, her heart breaking with each frame broadcasted onto the cruel screen. The silent cruelty of the wealthy was a hurricane of salt against old wounds, the same one she had spent decades trying to protect her daughter from. Tears welled as she watched her daughter glide through the gauntlet, her dignity intact while the hyenas circled. On deck, the insults grew bolder. Brielle, emboldened by the crowd's laughter, drifted closer to Marina, an empty champagne flute dangling from her fingers. She extended it toward Marina as if offering alms. "Hold this, would you?" she said sweetly, her voice carrying easily across the deck. "The help should at least be useful." A fresh eruption of laughter followed, sharp as broken glass. Marina paused. She took the flute, her hazel eyes steady, filled it from a tray nearby, and, without missing a beat, sipped from it herself. Her silent rebellion crackled through the tense air, but the crowd drowned it in their vicious glee. The staff began to murmur among themselves, some emboldened to join the spectacle. One of the yacht's chief pursers, a tall man with a polished nameplate and polished contempt, sauntered up beside her. "Miss, this area is reserved for invited guests only," he said loudly, gesturing toward her dress with a barely concealed smirk. Perhaps the technician's entrance would be more appropriate for simpler attire. Phones clicked, capturing her serene face and simple sandals, their group chats erupting with new hashtags, #CrewCrossover, #DockhandDebacle. Brielle leaned in again, her smile a polished dagger. "You should feel honored," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is the closest you'll ever get to a life like ours." The waves of mockery surged, a relentless tide designed to drown Marina's spirit. Petals of jasmine, plucked from the flower arrangements, were flicked toward her path by a clique of fashion house daughters. For the charity case, one of them called, as their laughter crescendoed under the fluttering sails. Marina kept walking. Her sandals whispered over the teak, each step a refusal to break, to yield, to grant them the satisfaction of her collapse. Behind her calm exterior, a silent fire burned. Each insult was an ember fueling a furnace she had long kept banked within her soul. She had faced rogue currents in the Arctic, braved typhoons that had bent steel ships to their knees. She would not falter now, not before these hollow airs and fragile empires. Far above the Celestia star, gulls wheeled against the endless blue, their cries lost beneath the clinking of crystal and the muted roar of cruelty. At the edge of the deck, Marina paused, her gaze sweeping over the gilded crowd, their laughter, their judgments, their fragile illusions of worth. The same crowd that, in mere moments, would learn that no title, no tiara, no checkbook could measure the true weight of a soul anchored by integrity. But for now, they laughed. For now, they sneered. For now, they danced atop their paper-thin pedestals, blind to the storm gathering on the horizon, one they had invited with their own poisoned hands. And as Marina Cross stood quietly amid their derision, the tides of Avalon Cove whispered a different truth, ancient and unbreakable. The sea bows for no crown. The laughter still clung to the salt air as Marina Cross stood quietly near the bow of the Celestia star, the jeering whispers and camera flashes ricocheting around her like hail on glass. The weight of 100 judging eyes pressed against her simple dress, but she remained still, her hazel gaze fixed on the horizon where the sapphire waters kissed the endless sky. She could feel the cruel pleasure radiating from the crowd behind her, every taunt and every sneer feeding a collective arrogance that seemed as permanent as the marble moorings of Avalon Cove. Yet above it all, the waves whispered back to her, steady and timeless, indifferent to the brittle laughter of those who mistook wealth for worth. A hush rippled suddenly through the marina, first tentative, then widening into an uneasy silence as a slender man in a charcoal Zegna suit ascended the dais at the heart of the deck beneath the flowing white silk canopy. His silver hair gleamed under the Mediterranean sun as he adjusted the microphone, his voice cutting clean through the humid air. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," he began, his accent polished, his smile tight with rehearsed ceremony, "it is my great honor to introduce the individual who will christen the Celestia star. symbol of legacy, innovation, and the enduring spirit of the seas. The crowd straightened, diamonds and polished shoes shifting with anticipation, their laughter forgotten, replaced with the eager gleam of aligning themselves with power. Whispers fluttered. Would it be a Gulf prince, a tech billionaire, a scion of ancient royalty? The speaker paused dramatically, letting the tension coil tighter before delivering the blow. "Please welcome," he said, his voice resonating over the water, "Dr. Marina Cross." The deck froze. A collective intake of breath seemed to vacuum the very air from the cove. Crystal flutes trembled in manicured hands. A Gucci heel snapped against the deck as someone stumbled backward. Eyes, still glazed with smug amusement only moments before, now bulged with disbelief. Across the globe, in a quiet coastal town, Marina's mother dropped her seashell pendant, her gasp echoing into her living room as the live-stream screen flashed her daughter's name across a golden banner. Marina turned, her simple sandals whispering against the polished teak, and stepped forward. Every movement, every breath, was a declaration. Her handcrafted cotton dress fluttered like a battle flag in the breeze as she mounted the platform, the jeers silenced, the laughter turned to ash in the mouths of the elite. She accepted the ceremonial champagne bottle with steady hands, the gold foil glinting in the sunlight. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, with a decisive swing, Marina shattered the bottle against the ship's gleaming hull, the champagne bursting forth in a wave of foam and light, a baptism for the vessel and a cleansing of the venom that had stained this deck only moments ago. Her voice, clear and unwavering, carried over the stunned crowd. "I named this ship Celestia Star," she said, and for the first time that day, silence bowed before her. The thrumming chop of helicopter blades grew louder, slicing through the tension like a blade through silk. Heads turned upward, eyes shielding against the sun as a sleek black chopper descended toward the private helipad beyond the marina. From its doors emerged Sterling Cross, his silver hair swept back by the wind, his tailored navy suit crisp against the backdrop of the endless blue. Time seemed to slow as he strode toward the deck, the founder of Crosswave Shipping himself, a man who had built an empire with his bare hands and ruthless intellect. He paused beside Marina, his presence a thunderclap that shattered whatever illusions the elite still clung to. His voice, when it came, needed no microphone. 40 years ago, Sterling began, his gaze sweeping the sea of frozen faces. "I built Crosswave Shipping with a single vessel, a heart full of dreams, and an unwavering belief in loyalty and honor." His voice sharpened like a harpoon. "Today, I see before me not the legacy I hoped to inspire, but a congregation of hollow titles and counterfeit respect." He turned to Marina, pride and something fiercer shining in his storm-gray eyes. "This woman," he said, his voice carrying easily across the stunned Marina, "chose a different path. She refused the easy fortune. She mapped forgotten currents that saved reefs. She led missions that restored oceans devastated by greed. She asked for nothing and earned the respect of the seas themselves." Murmurs of disbelief and shame rippled through the crowd, their earlier cruelty now a weight dragging them under. Sterling's voice dropped, cutting through their defenses like a blade. "I invited Marina here today without revealing her name, because I needed to see the truth. To see whether any of you still understood the meaning of dignity beyond diamonds, loyalty beyond logos, honor beyond hashtags." He withdrew a thick document from the inside of his jacket and held it aloft. "As of this moment, effective immediately," he declared, "the entire Crosswave Shipping Corporation, the Celestia Star, and every acre of Avalon Cove are transferred into the sole ownership of Dr. Marina Cross." The words detonated across the deck. Gasps, choked sobs, the muted clatter of champagne flutes hitting the teak echoed like a symphony of downfall. Sterling's gaze swept mercilessly across the glittering wreckage of reputations. "To those who mocked her," he said, his voice steely, "know this, you are erased from Crosswave's future. Your contracts are void. Your access revoked. Your partnership severed." Brielle Hastings paled, her perfectly contoured face slackening as her assistant frantically checked her phone, watching billion-dollar contracts evaporate like morning mist. Omar Al-Rahman swore under his breath, his Gulf logistics empire unraveling in real time. Celeste Beaumont clutched the edge of a marble column, her designer heels wobbling, as her family's fashion dynasty plummeted in valuation with every passing second. The live stream exploded. Hashtag Marina Rises. Hashtag Justice on the Waves. Hashtag Celestia Reckoning. Around the world, viewers erupted in cheers, their collective fury at the spectacle of arrogance now transformed into awe for the woman who had weathered the storm in silence and prevailed. Marina stood unmoving as the tide of downfall swelled around her. Her sea-hemp tie fluttered gently against her collarbone, her hazel eyes unwavering. She did not gloat. She did not revel. She simply existed in her truth, a lighthouse standing firm as the false stars around her blinked out one by one. The elite stumbled, desperate to pivot, to realign, to salvage their crumbling influence. Offers to apologize, to donate, to rebrand flooded the marina air like desperate prayers. But it was too late. The currents had shifted. The tide had turned. The true legacy of Avalon Cove was no longer theirs to shape. It belonged to Marina Cross, the woman they had laughed at, dismissed, ridiculed. The woman they would now have to beg for an audience they would never again receive. As the Mediterranean breeze carried away the last desperate whispers of the fallen elite, Sterling placed a hand lightly on Marina's shoulder. His voice, low and meant only for her, carried the weight of a father's pride and a man's redemption. "You didn't need my empire," he said. "But it needed you." And as the Celestia star rocked gently in the sparkling harbor, the sun glinting off its pristine hull, a new name etched into its soul, Marina Cross stood sovereign, not by blood, not by wealth, but by the unyielding power of her truth. The words still echoed across the polished decks as Sterling Cross lowered the signed transfer documents into Marina's hands, the final act of a legacy once measured by steel and salt now entrusted to a woman forged by tides deeper than any empire. Around them, the gilded crowd stood paralyzed, their gazes shifting from Marina to their phones and back again, desperately searching for a reality where their mockery could be undone. But the tide had turned and no amount of money, bloodline, or whispered apology could claw it back. Within minutes the fallout began to sweep across Avalon Cove like a wildfire. On the giant screens inside the yacht's private lounges, live streams once filled with snide comments and mocking hashtags now blazed with fury and awe. Hashtags like hashtag Marina Rises and hashtag Justice on the Waves exploding into global trends. Investors and board members watching from across continents immediately began pulling out, their faith in Brielle Hastings, Omar Al-Rahman, and Celeste Beaumont evaporating under the weight of public scandal. Brielle Hastings stood frozen on the starboard deck, her $80,000 gown suddenly feeling like shackles against her trembling skin as her assistant whispered frantic updates into her ear. Luxury conglomerates withdrawing partnerships, flagship stores facing protests, and worst of all, shareholders demanding her resignation before the sun could even set over Avalon Cove. The once unassailable queen of fashion was now a cautionary tale, her empire crumbling faster than a sandcastle beneath a rising tide. Omar Al-Rahman, the Gulf logistics magnate whose smirk had carried so much disdain hours earlier, frantically dialed contacts back home only to find his billion-dollar contracts slipping away like water through desperate fingers. His shipping fleets, once the envy of the Mediterranean, were now radioactive, his name blacklisted overnight. Celeste Beaumont, heir to a French fashion dynasty, watched in horror as her family's stock price hemorrhaged live on her phone, the elegant name once whispered in reverence now screamed in disgust across the headlines. Even the crew, who had joined the mockery with casual cruelty, found no refuge. One by one, the stewards and pursers who had laughed, who had smirked, who had sneered at Marina's sandals and simple dress, were called out by name on the live stream's hidden mics. Their badge numbers circulated like wanted posters, their employers forced to issue public apologies and sever ties, their once coveted careers reduced to ash before the sun dipped below the cove's cliffs. Marina moved through the wreckage with the same serene grace she had worn when she first set foot on the Celestia star, her sea-hemp tie fluttering against the wind, her hazel eyes never lowering to the desperate flailing around her. Sterling walked a step behind her, his presence a silent bulwark against the last flickering embers of arrogance that clung to the shattered elite. Together they reached the yacht's auxiliary dock where a small, weathered boat bobbed gently in the turquoise water. A stark contrast to the titanium monument of the Celestia Star, but no less regal in the truth it represented. Behind them, the once proud guests scrambled for relevance, some shouting into phones, some tearfully pleading with assistance, some frozen with shock as their social empires collapsed beneath the weight of their own cruelty. No PR firm, no crisis manager, no last-ditch donation to some environmental cause could salvage the rot that had been exposed beneath the diamond crust of their facades. Brielle Hastings made a final, desperate lunge toward Marina, her manicured hands trembling as she cried out, "Dr. Cross, please, it was a mistake, a misunderstanding," but Marina simply paused, her head tilting slightly, a soft pity touching her features for a moment before she turned away, offering no words, no vengeance, only the silence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The Celestia Star's own staff lined the decks now, their heads bowed not in mockery but in shame. Many of them realizing too late that they had sided with the fleeting glamour of arrogance rather than the enduring strength of integrity. The live stream captured every moment, the comments surging with overwhelming support for Marina, a global chorus rising against the sickness of privilege weaponized against decency. As Marina stepped onto the auxiliary boat, Sterling paused, glancing once more at the stunned Marina, his voice low but ironclad. "The tides remember," he said, not to anyone in particular but to the world itself, and with that he followed his daughter onto the modest vessel that now carried the future of cross-wave shipping, and of Avalon Cove itself. The boat pulled away from the glittering carcass of the Celestia Star, its small motor a soft hum against the crashing waves, leaving behind a deck littered with fallen crowns and empty laughter. Marina stood at the stern, her gaze tracing the endless horizon where sea met sky, her hair whipping around her face like a standard borne by the winds of change. She carried no crown, wore no jewels, but the ocean itself seemed to rise to greet her, its eternal rhythm echoing the truth she had proven without ever raising her voice. Strength was not measured by gold or bloodline or curated photographs. Strength was measured by who you remained when the tides of cruelty and vanity battered against your spirit, and Marina Cross stood unbroken. On land, the aftermath spread like a storm surge. Financial headlines screamed the collapse of Hastings Couture, the severance of Alramon Logistics from global ports, the boycotts crippling Beaumont Fashion House. Luxury conglomerates rushed to distance themselves, while everyday people, scientists, teachers, oceanographers, mothers, students, flooded Marina's public profiles with messages of awe and support. She became an icon not because she had sought it, but because she had refused to surrender her integrity even when the world had tried to shame it out of her. By nightfall, the hashtag Marina Rises had broken records. News outlets hailed her not as a shipping heiress but as a silent revolutionary, a living reminder that the true currency of leadership was character. Memorials of the Celestia Star christening played side by side with clips of Marina's quiet dignity under fire, and in living rooms across America, from Miami condos to Kansas farmhouses to San Francisco lofts, people sat a little taller, inspired by a woman who had walked into the fire and emerged carrying the future on her shoulders. The final frames of the global broadcast showed the Celestia Star in the distance, still glittering under the Mediterranean sun, but its sparkle was hollow now, abandoned by those who had once thought themselves untouchable. At the helm of the small boat, Sterling Cross watched his daughter with quiet awe. For all his empire, for all his ships and islands, he had never built anything finer than the woman standing before him. Marina reached up to adjust her simple sea-hem tie, her hazel eyes unwavering, her hand steady. The ocean air filled her lungs, the salt kissing her skin like an ancient blessing, and she smiled, not the smile of triumph over others, but the quiet, fierce smile of someone who had triumphed over herself. Ahead of them, Avalon Cove stretched out like a new beginning, its cliffs bathed in gold, its waters clear and waiting. The world they left behind would spend years trying to rebuild what had crumbled in a single afternoon, but Marina Cross needed no apology, no coronation, no reparations. She had already won, not because the empire was hers now, but because she had proven that it had never owned her. And as the auxiliary boat carried them toward the horizon, the last whispers of mockery drowned beneath the endless, eternal song of the sea, a song that sang not for crowns or fortunes, but for those rare souls who dared to stand unbowed against the tides. Sometimes, life places us in rooms where we are judged by appearances, by titles, by wealth, or worse, by shallow assumptions. Marina Cross walked into such a room, armed with nothing but her integrity, her quiet strength, and her refusal to let the cruelty of others define her worth. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply stood in her truth, and when the moment of reckoning came, it wasn't the voices of mockery that endured. It was the unwavering power of character that triumphed. The lesson from Marina's story is simple, yet so often forgotten in a world obsessed with surface and status. Your value does not diminish because others fail to recognize it. Dignity does not come from the approval of crowds. It comes from living with authenticity, staying true to the person you are when no one is watching, when no one is applauding. Strength is forged not in moments of easy acceptance, but in the fires of misunderstanding, rejection, and humiliation, and true victory is never loud. It is silent, steadfast, and undeniable. We live in a time where appearances are curated, where quick judgments are made with the swipe of a screen, and where worth is too often measured in fleeting followers and glittering possessions. But as Marina showed us, real worth is deeper. It is who you are when everything superficial is stripped away. It is the courage to stand alone if you must, the wisdom to know that storms are not meant to break you, but to reveal you. To every person who has ever been underestimated, mocked, or overlooked, remember Marina Cross. Let her journey be your reminder that sometimes silence is the strongest voice, and that the tides of life, like the ocean, have a way of setting things right in their own time. You do not need to shout your worth. You only need to stand in it. On behalf of U.S. Edifying Stories, I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. Your support, your reflections, and your presence here mean more than words can say. We are honored to share these moments with you, moments that remind us that integrity still matters, that truth still matters, and that no matter how loud the noise of this world becomes, grace will always be stronger. If Marina's story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to U.S. Edifying Stories. And always remember, you don't have to wear a crown to carry yourself like royalty. You only have to walk with your head high, your heart steady, and your soul anchored in truth. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, stay true, stay strong, and never let the world steal the light inside you.